Hello and welcome to Market Open Direct Connect, a webinar series for companies to tell their story, why it's compelling, and why it's an opportunity to invest. I'm your host, Stuart Walters, and we're joined here today by Allister Caird, the Managing Director, and David Wall, Chairman of Mount Ridley Mines, ASX code MRD. Allister will present the company's critical mineral strategy and portfolio, followed by a Q&A. So if you have any questions for Allister or David, you can submit them via the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. A recording of this webinar will be available on Market Opens and MRD's communication channels within the next 24 hours. So I'd like to introduce our guest, Allister. David, welcome to Direct Connect, and over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Cheers.
Thanks, Stuart.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining this morning's webinar. I thought that with our recently released mineral resource estimates, it would be a good time to do a company update and just share with our shareholders the progress and the path forward from here for Mount Ridley Mines. Okay, starting with the corporate snapshot, you'll note that there is a slight composition change to the board of directors. So since our last investor presentation, we are very fortunate to have welcomed David Wall to the board. David obviously brings extensive corporate advisory and capital markets experience, and he also has a tremendous international network, which will prove invaluable as we look to broaden our exposure into the Western Allied jurisdictions that our critical minerals are so important to. Looking at the cash position, we have $2.5 million in the bank, market cap of 40 million. So with David's appointment, I also came on as managing director. Peter Christie, who was our chairman for quite some time, has shifted into a non-executive director capacity. And Pedro Castellarizos has moved into a technical advisory role. So we're still very, very much involved with the company moving forward on the technical side. Stepping through our corporate highlights, for those short on time, these are obviously the high points of the presentation. We'll cover off most of these throughout the duration of today's presentation. Okay, taking a look at the revised corporate strategy. So we put out a revised corporate strategy at the end of 2025. It's very simple. We're focused on three simple objectives, where we're first and foremost, we need to look at expanding our existing asset base of resources, and we can do that in a number of ways. We have 70,000 meters of historical drilling and associated data. With that comes obviously a lot of pulps, samples, coarse rejects, and the like, some of which have not yet been assayed. So the simple process of reassaying can give us scope to expand our resource quite significantly. And then obviously, as we'll touch on a little bit later, we have a number of high priority walk-up targets that are drill ready, and as we look to expand our resource base laterally. The second strategy is really just looking at the downstream and metallurgical pathways. It's quite simple. We're looking to leverage the expertise of an international network, of which you might recall Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory out of California we partnered with at the end of 2025, and we're currently in the process of performing characterization and leach test work on our ore samples that were shipped over at the end of last year. And then finally, the strategic positioning and partnerships. So we're really looking to partner with groups that are aligned on either fast-tracking processing pathways or securing their own critical mineral supply. So those are in the form of off-takers and looking at federal funding initiatives. And we'll talk about a few of those in a moment. Okay, so taking a look at our critical mineral asset base and portfolio, you note that there's been some major progress on the resource front with the addition of both scandium and heavy rare earths already in 2026. We'll talk about those resource estimates in the upcoming slides. But to cover off a couple of high points, we have a very high grade heavy rare earth dominant resource in our heavy rare earth elements. That is well endowed with dysprosium and terbium. So we have approximately 5,000 tonnes of DyTb endowment. We have the scandium, which again was reported in February this year. The scandium represents, at the time of reporting, the second largest JORC compliant mineral resource estimate in the Western world, behind that of Sunrise Metals, who have a market cap of circa 1.1 billion, I think, last I checked. Then we have our gallium resource, which, like our scandium, is one of the largest reported JORC compliant gallium resources outside of China. And then finally, we have the lighter magnetic rare earth elements. So the figure that's referenced in the box to the right there, 23,500 tonnes, that is just the tonnage of NdPr within the grass patch complex. So those are blocks 1 and 2, and I'll show you that in a couple of upcoming slides, and that will give you a little bit of context. Additional to that figure, we do have a mineral resource estimate out at our Block 3 Mia prospect, which is further out to the east, and that's just in a different geological domain, and forms part of the non-core focus area of the project. And then finally, all of these critical minerals are hosted within the same regolith as one another, so that significantly reduces any material handling considerations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in upcoming slides also. Okay, taking a look at the history, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the history of Mount Ridley Mines, but to give you a little bit of a recap, we've been around since 2014. We actually started out as a base metals explorer, and we're focused on testing a gravity anomaly, which, as you'll see in the upcoming slides, is actually the grass patch complex itself. And that gravity anomaly at the time was considered to be an analogue, or a potential analogue, to IGO's Nova Bollinger deposit, which is some 70 kilometres to the northeast. From there, that ultimately didn't provide a commercial outcome for the company at the time. We did some reassaying in 2021 as the rare earth market gained momentum. And what we found at the time, that there was quite significant enrichment of rare earth elements within the regolith profile, so the shallower profile above the basement, and that ultimately led us to do some focus resource drilling, which was primarily air core between 21 and 23. And that was really focused out to our Mia prospect, which is out to the east, our Block 3 prospect. In 2024, we released the results of that resource drilling. We released a mineral resource estimate of 168 million tonnes of TREO at 1201 ppm. And this resource, as I mentioned before, is primarily the lighter magnetic rare earth. So we're really focused on neodymium and praseodymium at the time. This also coincided with a slight downturn, unfortunately, in the rare earth market sentiment. So we got limited traction during this, or at the time of the mineral resource release. From there, we looked at the existing assays and the reassays that we'd completed on the drilling data to date, and we did note that there was quite widespread and pervasive gallium enrichment. And this was noted at the time, but it was at the time of drilling, but it was considered insignificant. But when we really started to stitch it all together in a wireframe, we realised that this gallium enrichment, added up to quite a significant resource. And so at the end of 2025, we put out our gallium resource estimate, which is obviously a significant size, and really underpins, or helps underpin, the whole project. And then you'll note in 2026, earlier this year, we announced our scandium and our heavy rare earth mineral resource estimates. So we now have 3 mineral resource estimates across our grass patch complex, which is the core focus of the Mount Ridley project. And I'll talk a little bit about those in the upcoming slides. So a little bit of context for you. The Mount Ridley project is located 25 kilometres from the deepwater port of Esperance. A majority of the tenure is centred over what is known as the grass patch complex, which is a significant geological feature in the area. It's approximately 70 kilometres in strike and about 12.5 kilometres in width. So our exploration tenure mimics that geometry, and you can see that there as it sort of strikes in the southwest northeast direction there. And you can see there's the block out to the east is our Block 3 Mia prospect. As I mentioned, there's been substantial historical drilling, primarily air core. So we have 70,000 odd meters of historical drill data to work from. Very few diamond holes within that, and any of the diamond holes were really just twinning air core holes at the time, and so there has been very little basement penetration, aside from some of the earlier nickel and copper exploration drill programs. So. And why I mention this is because, given this is a regolith hosted resource, we do interpret that all of the heavy rare earth, scandium, and gallium enrichment is being weathered off the basement or directly off the basement. So what that means is it does provide some potential for a hard rock resource beneath the existing mineral resource estimates that we have at Mount Ridley. So that will form a secondary objective, I suppose, of any upcoming drilling programs that we look to achieve toward the end of the year. Okay, so taking a little bit of a look at the grass patch complex itself from a geophysical standpoint. So you can see on the image on the left shows a gravity anomaly or a gravity signature, which stands out above the background gravity response. And what that means, or why you have that gravity response, is because you have a denser basement profile, and that's owing to a more mafic composition of the basement. So you have multiple gabbroic intrusions across the tenure, and this is what creates particularly the heavy rare earth, and we believe the scandium enrichment in the regolith. So you can see that on the left-hand side there. On the right-hand side, you have a coincident magnetic signature as well, and again, that's owing to the intrusive nature of this complex. Finally, on this slide, you'll see that there are 3 polygons. You can see those in white. Those are the 3 resource areas, so the 3 mineral resource blocks. So you can see Block 1 is the southernmost, and then as you go to the northeast, you can see Block 2. Those are both obviously centered right over the main hinge of that of the grass patch complex there, and that forms the focus of the existing asset base, as well as further step out drilling that we look to do over the grass patch complex. Out to the east there, you'll see where a lot of the historical air core drilling has been completed. That is our Mia prospect, and as I mentioned before, that we have an established 168 million ton TREO resource at 1201 ppm out to the east there. So that it gives you a little bit of an idea of the grass patch complex and just why it stands out. This was the genesis of exploration for Mount Ridley, and it continues to be our focus moving forward. And then finally, on this slide, you'll note that just the scale of this province. As I mentioned, we have quite significant mineral resource estimates now across our critical mineral portfolio, but we estimate that only 20% of our exploration tenure has been tested to date by any modern drilling. So there is significant scope to expand our resource base through the drill bit. Okay, onto the heavy rare earth resource, which was released just last week. It's 122.5 million tonnes at 889 ppm TREO for an equivalent of 108,954 tonnes of contained total rare earth oxide material. The key here for us with this heavy rare earth mineral resource estimate is just the composition of that TREO resource in heavy rare earth elements. So 41% of that resource is enriched in heavy rare earth elements. And of that 41%, quite significant amount is dysprosium and terbium, which you'll see later on in this slide deck command quite a significant price premium in the market. And they're all trending in upward direction too. So I don't think it's, for us as a exploration development company, we think this provides significant potential for commercialisation into the future. And as I mentioned also, there is neodymium and praseodymium within these profiles as well. So 23,500 tonnes of NdPr within this same regolith profile. This will be our focus moving forward from a flow sheet perspective. So when we're designing our integrated flow sheet, we will be looking to really focus on this heavy rare earth element enrichment, followed by the scandium and the gallium, and then the lighter magnetic rare earths. And as you'll see again on the pricing slide coming up, that's sort of top to bottom priority for pricing. Okay, now the scandium resource. So we released this in February. Similar to our heavy rare earth resource, there is significant spatial correlation of the scandium resource with, it appears to be associated with the underlying mafic basement of the grass patch complex. The scale and the grade of our scandium resource, as I mentioned, is only surpassed by that of Sunrise Metals, who again have a market cap of 1.1 billion. So our scandium resource is a standout for a regolith hosted resource, and there is significant scope to expand this just through simple reassaying of existing drill pulps. So we've identified 20-odd thousand drill pulps during a sample inventory or sample cataloguing exercise, which is currently underway. We've identified that there are about 20,000 drill pulps that have not yet been assayed for scandium. So that is obviously quite significant in the context of the forward path for our mineral resource estimates and growing our resource base. So that is going to be a focus for the company moving forward. Obviously, we have a number of work streams that are in play in parallel. But that is just one of them. We added this slide in. I think it's important to sort of add a bit of an education piece around scandium. It's not an extremely well understood commodity. I think colloquially, I would explain scandium, to a layman as steroids for aluminium. So what I mean by that is it is a significant performance enhancer. To particularly aluminium, but other alloys as well, potentially, in very low concentrations. So you can see here by the image on the right-hand side, just small concentrations, say 1 to 2% scandium to an aluminium alloy is going to give you significant strength and weight, weldability and corrosion resistance enhancement. So it is, we believe at Mount Ridley that this is going to be a growing commodity. Its widespread adoption to date has obviously been significantly limited by supply. And given that supply, given that widespread adoption, the pricing is quite spotty as well. It's very difficult to index. But looking forward for scandium and what the future of the commodity might look like, we believe, I like to think of it that if scandium can penetrate just 1% of the aluminium market, which has a global or an annual consumption of around 70 million tonnes, if scandium can penetrate just 1% of that market, you're looking at a sort of a 50 to 70 time increase in consumption for scandium. So that is what we're focusing on. We believe that it's a highly valuable material, and particularly in rapidly expanding or growing industries such as aerospace, defence, and advanced electronics such as robotics. So we think the future is bright for scandium, and as I mentioned before, you can see this in I guess the success that Sunrise Metals has had to date. So our gallium resource is established across all three blocks. So it doesn't appear to have the same spatial correlation to the basement as our scandium and heavy rare earth elements have that we see in the grass patch complex there. So we see gallium across all three blocks. Our resource is obviously quite immense, containing 25,000 tonnes of gallium. And obviously, once you do the gallium oxide conversion, even more so. And gallium is quite an interesting commodity in itself, particularly just from the scarcity of supply or the dominant supply position that China currently have. again, like scandium, it's obviously involved in rapidly growing sectors, and you see this in the prioritization of G7 nations in looking to stockpile gallium alongside rare earths and antimony as well. So we believe the future is bright for gallium. We think that there is going to be a lot of attention given to allied Western projects that have large scandium resources, or large gallium resources like Mount Ridley. So this is there's a lot of upside in gallium here, and we believe our resource stacks up very well globally against our peers. Okay, taking a look at the future exploration at Mount Ridley. So despite our substantial resource base, there is significant scope to expand, just looking at step-out drilling. So you can see in the top image, we have highlighted a number of high-priority walk-up targets, of which there are currently 7. You can see that there are a few arrows there in the southwest and northeast direction, which show that it's open. And it's open because we just don't have that ground gravity data. So should we acquire more gravity data, we'd expect that there would be more prospects along strike there. But as it stands, we have 7 high priority walk-up targets. These targets correspond extremely well with the existing Block 1 and Block 2 mineralisation and their gravity response. So, these are high confidence targets, and we believe once we test some of these and we can establish that these are indeed coincident with heavy rare earth and scandium enrichment, as well as gallium, we believe that we've created quite a valuable proxy for further exploration. So along with that, we do have some secondary targets there, which are more on the radiometry side of things. So those correspond with thicker areas of regolith development. So really, we have a number of primary and secondary targets, and that's notwithstanding the hard rock basement potential as well. So as far as future exploration goes at Mount Ridley, the future is very bright. Okay, now to take a little bit of a look at so the economic side of the project, or the macro side of the project. The Mount Ridley project is in an extremely favourable position toward the top of these pricing charts. As you can see, you've got scandium, terbium, dysprosium, gallium, and then you've got your NdPr there as well as yttrium. So you can see that our resource base is really concentrated toward the top of this chart. And again, it's only looking to increase, particularly if you look at gallium here, 220 USD per kilo. That is a China price as well, just because it is so heavily controlled out of China. The export China prices are significantly higher, sort of 10 times higher. But we think that it's pertinent just to show the ex-China price at the moment, because those supply chains just have not yet developed outside of China. So the future is very bright from a pricing standpoint. And as I mentioned briefly before, the other consideration here is that much of our resource base is concerned with rapidly scaling industries like defence and aerospace and advanced electronics and semiconductors. So that means that the demand is likely only to increase. And some of these resources as well are the focus of stockpiling initiatives across all G7 nations. So we believe that we're in a very good position from a pricing standpoint. And obviously, this is a consideration when it comes to talking about basket prices and things like that, which is a very good comparison point when you like to stack up Mount Ridley against some of our peers. If we consider the supply dynamic, it's also clear that our asset base is concentrated near the top of this chart, meaning a lot of it is heavily supplied out of non-Western jurisdictions. So you look to gallium. I mean, there's a lot of figures. Somewhere between the 95 and 98% of gallium supply is coming directly out of China. Scandium, you're sort of looking at 60% out of China and 30% out of Russia, and then the other rare earth elements and heavy rare earth elements are around that 90% mark coming out of China. So a lot of people as well look at this supply dynamic, and they think that must just mean in ground or the resource is coming out of China, or the raw ore rather. But what is actually happening is that a lot of these minerals are being processed in China. So even minerals that are being mined elsewhere are still traveling through China to be processed, and so they have a dominant position on the processing side of things as well. And it's for that reason that a lot of federal initiatives are really focusing on bridging that processing gap, and they're really throwing a lot of money and expertise at this problem to close that gap as quickly as possible. So, I mean, that's something that we feel is an opportunity at Mount Ridley Mines, and that's why we've partnered with institutions like Lawrence Livermore in California. A little bit of a look at where we are positioned. We've touched on this very briefly, but we believe we're optimally positioned. We're on Western alloyed soil. We've got a lot of expertise in country in Australia. We are a mining dominant nation, and moreover, we're right next to a dominant export route there that has reasonable ullage as well. So there's plenty of scope to import and export from the Port of Esperance there, which we believe a lot of other projects don't quite have that sort of proximity to an export route. To out to site, we have sealed highways, and then hard packed tracks as well. And then finally, on this slide, there's been a number of well-documented agreements between Australia and other allied nations. The most notable, of course, was between Australia and US toward the end of last year, where there was a commitment to fund up to $8.5 billion for critical minerals project advancement. And then the other interesting side or part of that agreement was there was a few $100 million that was going to be dedicated specifically to a gallium processing facility at Wagerup in WA. So gallium and rare earths are obviously a real focus for G7 nations, particularly Australia and the United States, and Mount Ridley is right in the crosshairs, I guess, of those agreements. Couple more location highlights. The project's located primarily on Crown land, so you don't have the agricultural and pastoral overlay. We're adjacent to Goldfields and Esperance Highway, railway and gas pipelines, 20 k's from the airport, and then there's renewable wind and solar energy as well available nearby. And there has been some discussion as well around a desalination plant in Esperance too. So the future is bright for this region. It's a region that has a long history of mining. As I mentioned earlier, in the history of the company, we have been around for 12 years or so now. So it's a well understood jurisdiction, and we're well placed to capitalise on this sort of critical minerals push. Okay, so I guess this is the final project related slide, and very pertinent for Mount Ridley. As I mentioned before, there is a lot of focus for allied Western nations to bridge that processing gap to China. And we'll talk a little bit on this slide about just how we're planning on doing that, and then how do we move a project from exploration into development. So a lot of people know this, or it's fairly well understood, that for the past 30 years, Western allied nations have preferenced cheap and clean offshore processing in China. And when I say clean, I mean it's clean for Western nations. It's obviously not the most environmentally friendly process in China, and we've preferenced this cheap labour offshore over developing the skill set locally and in domestic jurisdictions in Western allied nations. So this is now becoming a real problem with these increasing trade tensions. It's not just a threat to supply, but as a lot of you would have heard, it's also a threat to national security, particularly in the US. So we believe this is an opportunity. Obviously, our resource base is heavily concentrated out of China, but a lot of the interest, at least from these federal jurisdictions, such as the United States and Australia, is really to focus on how do we solve this processing problem. A lot of the allocated funding is coming out of the US for critical minerals, and almost all of this funding is really focused on that downstream aspect. And it's for that reason that you just have the best experts here in these processing and metallurgical fields. And it's for that reason that we've partnered with Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. It's obviously an early stage agreement at the moment. It is a material transfer agreement. It lasts for a period of 6 months, and this agreement allows Lawrence Livermore to do some leach test work and characterization studies on the Mount Ridley ore, which will go into defining a broader work program, which we look to initiate later on this year, hopefully in the first half. Okay, I guess the final point on the Lawrence Livermore side of things is that they are a US Department of Energy funded institution. So any agreement with Lawrence Livermore is in part funded by the US DOE. So they have a vested interest in this project, and to this point anyway, there has been a lot of interest in the project, and we're looking forward to working with this team and moving the project forward. Okay, so I guess finally now, how do we plan on moving the Mount Ridley project from exploration into development? There are, as I mentioned, a lot of funding packages. A lot of these funding packages, at least in Australia, at this current moment in time, are not available to explorers. We need to get the project through scoping studies before we can look to get non-dilutive federal funding, and that is what the objective is for this year on the metallurgical side of things. We have done a lot of test work historically. A lot of that test work has been focused on the Block 3 Mia prospect out to the east there, which again, just to rehash, is overlies a more felsic basement composition. It has gallium out there, but really it is focused on those lighter magnetic rare earth elements. Our focus now is on the grass patch complex, blocks 1 and 2, with our heavy rare earth elements and our scandium resource. The focus really is now to go back and take a look at the available test work that's been done to date, and build a coherent data set that can be shared with our processing partners, and really just fast track this process as much as possible. I guess the theme here is that we're not starting from zero. We have a very good understanding of the composition and the chemical recovery of our asset base, but we need to look through it. We need to look at it again through a lens of heavy rare earth elements, scandium and gallium, particularly over our grass patch complex. Taking a little bit of a look at the indicative timeline, as I mentioned, we have 7 walk-up drill targets now. Our focus is on prioritising which of those we would like to test first in an upcoming drilling program. We've obviously been busy on the resource definition side of things already early in 2026 with scandium and heavy rare earths coming out. And as I mentioned before, there is scope for that to expand even further without needing to turn the drill bit. And again, that just comes through reassaying of our existing sample inventory of pulps and coarse rejects. Phase 1 drilling, we'll look to complete that toward the end of the year, and we'll be focusing on obviously the outcomes of that prioritization work earlier. We are currently undertaking historical metallurgical test work review with a focus on blocks 1 and 2 there, and trying to understand how they compare to the test work we'd previously released on our block 3. Then from there, we'll be looking to undertake that larger body of work with Lawrence Livermore sort of starting from August, September onwards. So we'll have the results of that initial MTA, and as I mentioned before, that will define the upcoming metallurgical work program. Prior to that, there will be early flow sheet design. We've got a bit of an idea. There's been some really good work done by some of our peers, and we will leverage those lessons learned and look to design an integrated flow sheet specific to Mount Ridley. And so we need to design or develop some envelope conditions there on the metallurgical side of things. And then finally, these are two initiatives that are always in play for us, looking for offtake agreements and allied partnerships and federal funding pathways. So we've had a number of conversations now with federal bodies in both the US and Australia. We've got a very good understanding of just when those funding pathways will become available for us. But this is an ever-changing landscape, and so we have to keep our ears to the ground here, and keep sort of kicking the tires until our projects mature enough, or until the policies change enough to receive that federal funding. Okay, so the final slide now is the upcoming investment catalyst. So we've talked about these throughout the slide deck, but just to rehash, we're going to advance our downstream strategy, and we're doing that through high-profile partnerships such as Lawrence Livermore. We're also speaking to other international parties as well. We're reassaying the pulps. As I mentioned, we're just completing a sample inventory body of work at our Esperance storage facility, where we've identified 20,000 drill pulps that have yet to be assayed. That provides exceptional scope to expand the resource base. We've got metallurgical test work to focus on primarily the extraction of the highest value critical minerals in our asset base. So heavy rare earth elements, scandium and gallium, that will be the focus for an integrated flow sheet design. We've spoken in depth with Lawrence Livermore about producing an MREC, or a mixed rare earth carbonate, or individual metal oxides as a proof of concept. They are of the belief that this is achievable in the next couple of months. So conservatively, we hope to have this prior to Q4 this year, and we believe that'll be an important I guess milestone for the company moving forward, is really developing or showing that the project has a tangible output there. Step out drilling of the grass patch complex. Obviously, we have a number of high priority targets there, and we can expand the resource base quite significantly with the drill bit. And then obviously the advancing of early offtake agreements, and then the federal funding initiatives in both US and Australia. So I believe that brings us to the end of our.
Al, thank you, mate. Fantastic presentation, extremely informative as always. We have had a lot of questions come in, so we'll get straight on to those. And I'm going to introduce Dave at the very start with the first one. Dave, obviously new to the company, and a huge vote of confidence from investors when new people put money in. You've invested $180,000 on market. What was your decision behind this?
Yeah, thanks, Stu. I mean, clearly I see a lot of value here. And I guess you can probably guess that, and this might be preempting another question, that there's no near-term capital raising coming, because if there was, I wouldn't be putting money in the market. But I mean, maybe Al, if you can just put that catalyst slide up. I mean, that's the key thing, I guess, for me, right? So you look at the company, the resource is unique. All the catalysts are ahead of them. It's a fairly clear and well-defined strategy. So unlocking value, I think from here is something that investors can actually look through to seeing. And that's, for me, what attracted me in part to the company. But I guess in short, this is the time to get set. So I'm just taking advantage of that before all of these catalysts are achieved.
And the project continues to demonstrate heavy rare earths alongside gallium and scandium potential. How should investors think about these additional metals within the overall development?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a good question, and I think one of the guys on the call asked something related to this. And the game changer is really this heavy rare earths component. Dysprosium and terbium are not replaceable, so you can't find these in any waste streams. So in terms of disrupting the supply of those from, processing, gallium from bauxite or lighter rare earths from fly ash or something like that. You can't do that with heavy rare earths. So 98% of these products are, coming out of China, as Alistair mentioned. So we really need a non-Chinese supply. And what Mount Ridley has is quite unique in terms of the ratio of heavy rare earths in its basket, which makes actually its basket probably 2 times or more than most of the peer group. So that's really the key. And then if you're getting gallium and scandium effectively for free, which are also extremely important in the global supply for a lot of critical industries that are all growth industries, then that's obviously very attractive.
And Al, you're prioritizing 12.8 kilometers of primary targets from the geophysical review. What specifically gives you confidence these targets can translate into a meaningful resource outcome?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess, we had a large body of data to derive these priority targets from. So, we didn't just look at gravity, we looked at magnetic, radiometry, EM as well. And so looking at all of those data sets, we felt that the gravity is the best correlation with the existing MREs. So here, as my computer tries to do an update, excuse me. So yeah, confidence really comes from just how close the priority targets line up with the existing MREs, and given they're on trend as well, they have the same geometries over the grass patch complex. That's what gives us the confidence that these are going to be walk up drill ready targets that should prove to be enriched in our valuable critical mineral base.
And there's been approximately 70,000 meters of historical drilling, but limited basement penetration.
Mm-hmm.
How does your upcoming drilling program change the geological understanding versus prior work?
Yeah, so I guess, as I mentioned, the 70,000 meters is primarily air core, so it is just shallow. We are just drilling through the regolith until we get drill bit rejection at the basement. Having said that, we do have some basement drill core at our storage facility in Esperance. They were obviously taken as part of the nickel and copper exercise there. Those have not yet been assayed for rare earth elements. But again, those drill programs were not optimally located. They weren't targeting necessarily the gabbroic intrusions there. So, as we look to test the regolith in upcoming exploration drill programs, we will be looking to place those programs or those drill programs over potential hard rock enrichment as well.
And you're progressing stage metallurgical test work and early flow sheet design. What are the key technical risks in beneficiation and recovery that still need to be resolved?
So again, we're not starting from scratch here. We have done a lot of beneficiation to date. So we had some really good results, sort of up to 200 and above 200% in beneficiation improvement in mass rejection. So, we'll leverage those results, but those are very, I guess, conventional techniques used. That was just sort of simple sieving at I believe it was 70 and 100 microns. Those yielded good results a number of years ago, but as always, technology is ever changing, and there are new techniques. So I think hydrocyclones are some of those techniques that may prove even better upgrade of our ore. So there's a lot of opportunity in going back here and working with groups like Lawrence Livermore to develop techniques that just yield better outcomes for our ore.
Dave, I've got another one for you here. When you look at Mount Ridley compared to peers like Victory, what stands out most to you? Is it the valuation or resource?
Victory's quite a good comparison in a lot of ways because, they have a great project and they're a bit further along the curve in terms of understanding their metallurgy and having done some of the studies that, we have ahead of us. So I guess it's a bit of a roadmap, vis-a-vis these catalysts that you can see on the screen on how to increase the value of Mount Ridley from 40 million today to 200 million in a relatively short period of time, hopefully, which is where Victory is. And they've obviously done a good job, and they've got a higher market cap, and that as a result of that, we do share some similarities with their project, which I think are advantageous, and that's why they've been given some marks of approval by the market. But we also have some key differences, and I think some of this comes back to this basket price, which is an in-ground kind of value metric, which is not super meaningful until we've done the metallurgical work, which is coming up. So I guess it's just progressing along this path as they've done, and hopefully we'll get the re-rate. And I think in my view anyway, that's just a matter of time, and that's the opportunity, like I said before, about getting in now.
And our location to port is always a factor. With Mount Ridley so close to the port and infrastructure, how do you expect potential partners to see this as a major advantage?
Yeah, I mean, it is a major advantage. It's something that we've discussed in depth, particularly with institutions out of the US. I guess gallium it's a great door opener for the project, and what I mean by that is the as you might recall, in 2024 there was an export ban on gallium from China, and just to rehash, 98% of the supply comes out of China. So there was effectively no global supply pathway for gallium. So I believe it was toward the end of 2025, there was a suspension on that export ban, which means obviously, exports of gallium can begin once more, but that ban doesn't extend to the US Department of Defense or Department of War. So they are desperately looking for gallium supply and heavy rare earth supply. And our project's location immediately close to a port is optimally placed. I mean, it's very easy to truck the ore or have a conveyor to the port and export it that way. And whether you have a beneficiation facility or something on site or close to site, that'll significantly reduce the amount of, or improve the concentration of the material that will be shipped. But it's certainly an important talking point, and something we have discussed at length with institutions in the US. And the forward path is difficult to predict, but there is certainly an opportunity to have a processing facility in the US whereby our ore could be shipped and processed, and then you could have off-takers in the US from there. So that's a pathway, and it's an opportunity for the company. Having said that, we can keep the ore in country as well. I guess it just depends on where the funding comes from and just how things shake out over the next 12 to 18 months.
And on the federal funding pathways, and you've got that being pursued in parallel with development, how important is non-dilutive funding to your strategy, and what are the realistic timelines for you?
Yeah, so in conversations we've had with the Critical Minerals Office and the Export Finance, the Department of Australia, it's pretty clear that we need to complete the scoping studies. And so to do that, obviously, we need to finalise our metallurgical test work. Again, it has been focused historically on Block 3 and MIA. So we need to look at it through the lens of Block 1 and Block 2, and we need to complete this work program with Lawrence Livermore. But once that is done, we can complete our scoping studies and sort of move through to the PFS. And then that's when the federal funding and the non-dilutive funding is on the table. And I think, ultimately, as a company, that's where we'd like to get to. We want to have that pathway for long-term shareholder value. And I think our shareholders, and particularly our new shareholders, have the benefit of a lot of historical work to leverage off. So that's not just the drill program, so the 70,000 meters of historical drilling, but it's also the extensive metallurgical test work suite that we have. So we really see our current cash balance supporting the balance of the 2026 activities. And hopefully that can take us through, as close as possible to the PFS or the early scoping studies, and then we can look to the non-dilutive funding angle through federal initiatives.
And our minerals sit within highly concentrated global supply chains with strong geopolitical demand. How are you positioning Mount Ridley to benefit from Western supply chain realignment?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we're just speaking to any and all of those allied Western jurisdictions. So again, it's sort of leveraging the project's position. We're leveraging the exploration maturity of the project and just the upside as well. This isn't a project with a 10 or 20-year mine life. The scale that we have now and the scale that this project could become, you're looking at a multi-generational opportunity. And I think that's not lost on these Western supply chains. So it's really just trying to understand what they need and how quickly we can get it. And a lot of that will, come back to the work that we're going to complete in the next 12 to 18 months.
And with approximately $2.5 million cash and a broad execution plan underway, how far does the current funding take you?
I mean, I think Al kind of mentioned it, and I guess that's one of the other things that when I looked at Mount Ridley, and obviously why I went and bought on market is, a relatively small amount of money can go a long way in this company because of all the historical work that's been done. And so it's not just, as Al said, the drilling, but also the metallurgical test work. I mean, we've got, stolen a march on all of this work for a company of this size. So a lot of the high value uplift work being done this year doesn't require a lot of capital. So that's kind of a fairly key point for investors, looking at maybe making an investment decision in the stock is, there's no plans to raise capital in the near term. And there's a lot of high value catalysts coming using, the funds that we've got.
Excellent. And interesting one here, Al. 889 ppm isn't that high. How is this economic?
Yeah, I figured something like that may come up at some point. But this puts us in I think it's very important to talk about how that 889 ppm resource estimate for our heavy rare earths, compares, I guess, to industry peers and other regolith hosted rare earth players. I guess if you just look at the TREO value, 889 doesn't seem that high, but it's not. It's about the concentration of those high value critical minerals. So you're looking at the dysprosium, your terbium, your yttrium, which is almost on sort of an exponential price path at this stage. But if you just take that TREO figure of 889, if you compare that to, say, Victory, we have mentioned them a few times now, but if you look at Victory's rare earth resource, they're sitting at around 500 TREO or thereabouts. But where it really makes a difference is when you strip out the lighter ends and you just look at the concentration of the heavies. If you just look at the heavy concentration, we're sort of looking around 370, 380 ppm HREO. And then, off the top of my head, that there was a chart floating around somewhere. I saw that Victory's is sort of around that 180. So we're almost double the heavy rare earth concentration of Victory. So I guess in summary, if you just consider that 889 figure, it's not a true representation of the value we have in our project. You really have to distill it down to that heavy rare earth component, and then make that reference back to the pricing chart earlier in the presentation today, and just look how that heavy composition stacks up price wise. And then, as Dave mentioned as well, on top of that, you also have the gallium and the scandium credits, and our scandium in particular is extremely high grade for a regolith hosted deposit. So those are essentially free credits if you're looking at a basket price focused around the heavy rare earth composition of our project.
That's great. We've got only time for a couple more before closing out the scheduled time. Al, as you move ahead with upgrading existing mineral resource estimates, does that include upgrading from inferred to measured, and what sort of time frame?
That work is underway. We have people working on that currently. In terms of upgrading from inferred to indicated or measured, that is something that we are looking at. We have a lot of drilling around here. It really just comes down to the drill spacing and whether we can satisfy with the existing data set that upgrade. But we can certainly look, and we have established that we already have scope, pending assay results or re-assay results rather, to expand the resource base on an inferred basis. So there's certainly expansion there. Whether there's upgrades, I guess that's a TBA.
And lastly, can niobium replace scandium in some applications, and how much impact would it have on the demand?
The short answer is no. I mean, and it might be there's a bit of not confusion, but niobium is really the kind of element that's used to strengthen steel. Scandium is used to strengthen aluminium. Steel is something like 3 times more dense, so that it has very different applications. Aluminium is more for these lightweight applications, which is the aerospace, the robotics, and some of these other industries, whereas steel is, construction and other things where you need the more dense material. So hopefully that answers that one.
Gentlemen, thank you. That is all we've got time for today. We've nearly gone an hour there, so well done. Extremely valuable presentation and a learning for everybody. We also appreciate you taking part in the Q&A and being honest and upfront with the questions that come through. For more information about Mount Ridley Mines, you can head to the company website, which is mtridleymines.com.au, or you can follow the company's social media channels or join the Relate Investor Centre. Thank you to everybody for attending today. It's certainly an exciting time ahead for the company. Allister, Dave, wish you and the team all the very best. And as always, look forward to chatting again soon.
Thanks, Stu.
Thanks for joining.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.